All right, welcome. This webinar is on Section C, Assessing Students in Online Courses. I'm Helen Graves, an instructional designer with the CVC-OEI. If that's an acronym that's new to you, it stands for California Virtual Campus Online Education Initiative. And today we're going to talk about how Section C of the OEI Course Design Rubric can help you be more effective in assessing students in an online course. There are live captions available to access. Thank you to our captioner, Carla. To access them, you will click on the CC icon in the Zoom menu bar. If you're not yet familiar with Zoom, and nowadays pretty much everybody is, but if you're not yet, there is a chat feature which you'll find in the Zoom menu. When you click it, a pop-up window will open and you can just type in your comments at the bottom of that little field. And then when you hit return, your message will be there for everybody to see. So a little note, we know you may have questions about Zoom or about Canvas or about online learning in general. For today, I'm going to ask that we stay focused as much as possible on our topic of Section C and online assessment, just because, you know, that's a big enough topic. And so I want to make sure we get all of your questions answered and all the information I want to share with you. If other questions come up in chat, Cheryl and Sean, my trusty cohorts in crime, and Stacy too maybe, may have a resource they can share with you, but I'll be directing my attention to questions about assessment. Fair enough? Okay. So Section C of the OEI Course Design Rubric, as I said, is all about assessment, both formative and summative. There are many ways to assess student performance: discussions, essays, short answer questions, quizzes, having them create videos or slide presentations or other projects. The aspect for all type assessments is that they be clear, reliable, fair, and valid. The guidelines provided by the rubric support the presence of those characteristics. Let's lay a foundation. Why should we assess student learning regularly? Well, I have to admit, I'm very excited to talk with you about this topic because it may sound geeky, but I find assessments thrilling. That's how I know whether I've been effective or not. Teaching really is only half the equation. Students learning, I'm not really doing my job. All of my fabulous lectures and brilliant presentations and entertaining video tutorials and snappy assignments really aren't worth very much if I can't tell whether my students are learning from them. So to me, as a teacher, assessments are the pièce de résistance of all my efforts. Analyzing student performance helps us and them determine what they've learned well and where they may still need some help. And that's why it's crucial to include both formative assessments, which are usually those low to no stakes things, and they're used as a tool to determine gaps in learning, and also to include summative assessments, which are the typically higher stakes quizzes, exams, and assignments that evaluate how much a student has learned throughout the course. There are 8 elements in Section C, covering all aspects of including assessments effectively in an online learning environment. We're going to go over each one to offer clarification, as well as ideas of how that particular element might be demonstrated in your course. So buckle yourselves in and let's go. C1 is about authenticity, and the definition is assessment activities lead to the demonstration of learning outcomes. And demonstration is that key word. Assessment is very much tied to learning objectives, and it's never more apparent than in rubrics elements C1 and C2. C1, authenticity, has to do with making sure assessments are meaningful. The key criteria are that students are actively involved and are demonstrating knowledge. Assessments are going to be most useful to both you and your students when they're measuring contextualized comprehension, the ability to apply knowledge in real-world situations. And this is in contrast with standardized multiple choice tests, which tend to measure one's ability to memorize and regurgitate facts. Nothing wrong with knowing facts, but knowing a fact doesn't mean you actually know how to apply that fact in a meaningful way. If we think back to third grade story problems, many of us knew our basic facts, but we could not interpret that story problem to save our lives. So we want to make sure our assessments are authentic, so we're helping students apply the information in a real world way. For example, if my learning goal is that students be able to accurately take someone's blood pressure, it doesn't do much good to have them watch a video of somebody else taking blood pressure and then asking them questions about it. They very well may be able to answer those questions correctly, but still not know how to use a sphygmomanometer. Ooh, don't you love when you get a chance to use a big word like that? An authentic assessment starts with asking, what should the student be able to do, the learning goal, and then developing an activity that evaluates how well students demonstrate that ability. It is possible to craft quiz questions that use higher order thinking skills and which approach a more authentic way of measuring learning. So you would do this by taking the time to write meaningful questions, kind of like a mini case study that asks students to analyze and apply facts in order for them to be able to select the correct response. True-false questions are probably best avoided, since flat out guessing is going to result in at least a 50% chance of a correct answer. And I will actually share with you, I don't even have a midterm or a final in the class I teach, and my department chair is fine with that, because what I do have are authentic activities each week that directly relate to the learning goals of the course. And that's how my students demonstrate their learning and how I'm able to assess and grade them. C2 has to do with validity. And the definition of that one says assessments appear to align with the course objectives. So validity has to do with the connection between the purpose of the assessment and the data that's being quantified by the assessment. So this criteria is all about making sure the assessments are actually measuring what they're intended to measure. Again, very much related to learning goals. You have to be sure you know what it is that's being assessed. So, for example, if the learning objectives include analyzing causes of the Civil War and comparing and contrasting combat strategies used by the North and South, it wouldn't be a valid assessment to ask students to name the top military leaders of the Civil War. It's not germane to the stated objectives. So to demonstrate alignment with C2, you're going to want to be sure there's a clear connection between the learning goals and the outcome of the assessments. C3 is variety, and the aligned definition of that says that both formative and summative assessments are used throughout the course. By using different types of assessments, it supports higher order thinking, and it's also going to allow students to show, it's going to allow them to show that they understand and can apply concepts rather than just memorize information for a quiz. So what this criteria is looking for is that a course includes a balance between formative assessments, which, as we mentioned earlier, provide opportunities for growth and revision, and summative assessments, which provide a measure of student performance over time. By including a variety of assessment activities, it tends to improve the validity and reliability of the course assessments as a whole. It tends to allow students to demonstrate their learning in a variety of ways, and it tends to increase student interest and engagement in the activities. It's not just the same old, same old. Another way to ensure variety is by offering flexibility, by giving students choice in their assessment. So you have different formats and you let them choose the preferred format that they want to be assessed on. Yeah, again, I dangled a preposition. Anyhow, so let's say the assessment is they explain the process of mitosis, or they offer critical analysis of Pride and Prejudice. They then have a choice of providing you with an essay, or a slide presentation, or a screencast, whatever they wish to do. So the assessment outcome is clear. The way they demonstrate their knowledge, they have choice in. And this actually follows the universal design for learning principle of providing multiple means of expression. C4 is frequency. And the aligned definition says that multiple assessments are administered during the duration of the course. The rubric doesn't specify how often assessment has to occur, but let's talk about the value of assessment, and then you'll be better able to determine a frequency schedule that's going to support your students and your content. You're also going to want to factor in C3, variety, so you're not just having students do the same kind of assessment week after week. We have seen courses come through the peer online course review process with just a midterm and a final, and maybe a couple of discussions thrown in. I will say those courses have not been found to be aligned with C4, and here's why. Frequent assessment can influence how students spread out their study activities. Studying regularly instead of cramming for that quiz tends to benefit long-term retention. So we want to encourage regular study. Additionally, the act of assessment itself can contribute to learning and retention. Conventional wisdom has always been that learning occurs when people study. So more study equals more learning. And that testing is kind of a neutral learning event. This has actually been proven to be erroneous on both counts. There is much research out there pointing to the fact that repeated testing, assessment, not studying, has been shown to be a critical factor for long-term recall. And in fact, repeated studying produced essentially no benefit. It turns out the very act of feeling a little bit of performance stress and the effort the brain puts into determining the right answer actually combine to strengthen the neural pathways that are related to retention of subject matter. So what it's important for both instructors and students to understand is that more study does not equal more learning, and that assessments can be a rich opportunity for learning. I strongly recommend communicating with students about the purpose and benefits of frequent assessments. It can be key in reducing any possible feelings of pressure from seeing frequent graded assessments, and also helps increase students' effort on non-graded assessment when they understand the reasoning behind it. So I've done a lot of talking, and I want to take 3 or 4 minutes to see if you have any questions about C1 through C4, and then I'll continue with the last half of the rubric. And what I'm going to do is have Cheryl or Sean tell me if there's anything in chat. But if you have a question you want to share out loud, I'm going to ask you to use the raised hand feature in Zoom and let us know you have a question, and then we can unmute you. You'll find it in the participant option. You should see raise hand as one of the options. And Cheryl or Sean, is there any question related to C1 to 4 that you guys haven't answered yet that I should address?
Jessica just came up with, is there a way to link the SLOs?
Got it, okay.
To rubric?
I don't know if you mean a technical in Canvas thing, and I don't have an answer to that. What I will say, when we're talking about objectives in most of the rubric, we're often referring to unit objectives so that students are seeing a connection between that. And then assessments, you do want to make sure those are aligned with the SLOs as well as unit level objectives. But if what you're asking is a specific technical way in Canvas to connect, I don't have an answer to that. I don't know if Sean or Cheryl, you know more about it.
I just know that it is possible using the outcomes function in Canvas.
Right, but I don't know the mechanism of it, so I didn't want to try to tell you anything, Jessica, and then have it be totally wrong. What I'd probably recommend is if somebody on the call knows, maybe they can give you an answer in chat, or check out the Canvas guides about using the outcome tool, and it probably will support you in figuring out how you can link them without it messing up your point values.
I just posted that in the chat for the
Excellent.
guides, for the outcomes.
Thank you, Cheryl. Perfect.
You're welcome.
Okay, how do you determine authenticity and validity with a discipline that you don't know well or at all? That would certainly be a challenge, wouldn't it? So that I don't have an answer to, except that department chairs should probably not be giving courses to people that don't know the subject matter, but that's, you know, my own 2-bit opinion. I guess one option is to find a subject matter expert and ask for their consultation to help you determine it.
Helen?
Yes.
That might be referring to doing reviews, actually.
Ah, okay, thank you. I didn't even think of that. So if you're doing a review, and that's a little bit of a specialized question, and maybe something we can talk more about, Carol, in our norming call at the end of this month. Often you can kind of tell, like that blood pressure one. If I'm having somebody watch a video of something and then testing them on what they got out of the video, but the objective says the student will be able to take blood pressure. Well, even if I don't know how to take blood pressure, I can tell that that's not an authentic assessment, because they're not being asked to demonstrate taking blood pressure. They're just answering questions about a video. So I think often, as an intelligent reviewer, which I know you are, you'll be able to tell. And then if you have a question, you can always check in with someone. But thank you, Sean, for pointing me in the right direction on that one. Okay, there's all kinds of stuff in chat, so I know I'm not seeing everything. Cheryl or Sean, is there another question that I missed that I should address right now before we go on?
Basically, no, just
Okay.
sharing the rubric, which there is a new updated rubric on the website dated
Yes.
April 2020.
Yes, and just know it's not a total redo. It's just a few little, well, not minor, because there's significant wording changes, but it doesn't change the structure of the rubric or any of the criteria. It's just clarifying with a little bit of language to make it easier for the people using the rubric to know exactly what that item is looking for. So we don't want you to panic and think you've got to learn a whole new rubric. You don't. It's just, I mean, a lot of people won't even notice the changes. So I see in there about saving chat. Last time I checked, Zoom had taken away the save chat feature, so you guys may want to, oh good, it's back. All right, on the last webinar I did, it wasn't there. So yeah, you can save the chat at the end of the call, and that way as we're putting in links of resources, you'll be able to get to them. I'm gonna go on to the next set of rubric items, and then we'll have more time for questions. All right, moving on. So C5 is about rubrics and scoring guides, and the definition of aligned for this one says that rubrics or descriptive criteria for desired outcomes are included in most or all assessment activities. I have to admit, I don't like that it says most. I think every assignment and assessment should include descriptive criteria so students know what to expect in terms of output and grading, but they didn't ask my opinion on this one, and apparently I neglected to share it. So if you are a fan of me, you'll delete most and just know that all of your assessments and assignments should include rubrics or descriptive criteria. In any case, I talked a bit about rubrics in last week's webinar on section B, and I'm going to talk a little bit about them again because it's apropos to this rubric element. Rubrics are useful in helping to remove the subjective nature of grading assessments. They help set up expectations, they provide guidelines for success, and they provide feedback for improvement. And let me just show you a quick example. When you break your rubric down into very specific grading criteria, that's what's most useful to students. And then when you break each criteria down into different ratings, that also is very useful to students because they don't have to guess. Sometimes I see where a rubric will have a bunch of different criteria, and then the rating says student met 3 of the 5 criteria, but they don't know which 3 of the 5, so it doesn't really help them improve next time. So that's where rubrics really are most useful, when they're chunked in this way. A well thought out rubric is made as clear, consistent, and defensible as possible by explicitly defining that criteria that you're using to evaluate the performance. So it's going to articulate for the student, even before they begin the assignment, exactly what you're looking for. And it's going to let students know how the item is going to be graded. So it will mean a lot less, why did I get a C, emails that you have to respond to. You are not required to use the Canvas rubric tool, but it makes grading so easy. I would seriously recommend you give it a try if you haven't yet. All the reluctant instructors that I've persuaded to give it a whirl have become converts. If you're using scoring guides or narrative grading criteria rather than rubrics, just make sure they're comprehensive and clear. And I have a couple of resources I want to share with you about rubrics. I'm going to put them in the chat. One of them is a blog post from a year or 2 ago about the value of rubrics and setting them up. And another is a bite-sized Canvas screencast, also on rubrics. And so both of those hopefully will be useful to you as you dive into giving rubrics a try. So the next item is instructions. And the aligned definition says that instructions clearly explain to students how to successfully complete the assessment. Instructions are like a map that's going to help students meet your expectations with ease. Both rubric A9, rubric item A9 and C6 deal with instructions. The distinction is that A9 deals with instructions for course content. C6 is specifically about instructions that accompany assessments. And these instructions should both explain the assessment, its purpose, and how it connects to the learning goals, and provide step-by-step directions for successfully completing and submitting the assignment. Before they engage with the actual assessment, you want to be sure students understand the assessment method that's being used, what content is relevant to the assessment, any provisions for students who may have special needs, how they're going to be graded or how their performance will be reviewed if that's applicable, and what resources they might need to use. And you want to ensure that the instructions, as I mentioned, are clear, thorough, and student-oriented. I actually recommend creating a template, and let me show you an example, for your discussions and assignments with, an appealing banner, just for visual interest. And then you have sections for these directions. So you've got an introduction or goals area that talks about why are they even taking this assessment. And then the step-by-step instructions for exactly what they need to do for this assignment or this assessment. And then sections on grading and submission details, especially students that are new to Canvas early on in the semester. They may not know how to submit an online assignment or whatever. So you want to be sure to let them know those kinds of things. Quizzes aren't going to need the information about grading or submission details, but you still can draft a boilerplate set of detailed instructions that you can then paste on your quiz. So let me show you an example of that. And you can see here, I've got just 2 sections, but you can tell them what's the content that's being covered. Do they get multiple attempts? Is the quiz timed? The kinds of things that may be obvious to you because you set up the quiz, but students may not know it. And so you're just sharing with them all that pertinent information. And if you create a set of boilerplate instructions and your quizzes, which often follow the same kind of format, you can just paste those same directions in every quiz. You don't have to rewrite it every time. C7 has to do with feedback. Now we know you're giving feedback, and going back to that research on retention and the value of assessment, If you're using quizzes, simple forms of feedback, basically, yay, you're right. It's effective when learners are answering the question correctly. But more detailed forms of feedback, like providing and explaining the right answer or explaining why a wrong answer is incorrect, are helpful when learners don't get it right. Studies have indicated that when an incorrect answer was made, the corrected feedback, explaining the correct answer, offered a roughly 5-fold increase in the chance of successful recall. Merely telling them right or wrong had very little effect on retention. It's giving them that corrective feedback that was important in the retention. And then withholding corrective feedback after somebody made a mistake was always harmful to their learning because they didn't know that they got it wrong or that why they got it wrong or anything. Canvas, if you're using, again, quizzes, allows you to pretty easily provide this more detailed feedback with the customized feedback responses that you can add to quiz questions. So you don't have to give that feedback individually. You can set up your quiz with those resources. No, you got this wrong because you added instead of multiplied, and go back and read this, or whatever it is that's going to be appropriate to the incorrect response that they made. And just so students aren't left wondering, the other important aspect of C7 is to provide a clear explanation for them of how and when they can expect feedback from you. As I said, we know you're giving them feedback, but students don't necessarily know that. It's always surprising to me how often they think they just got the grade. They didn't realize I'd spent all this time on the written feedback for them. So telling them how and where to expect it is great. And this can be a section in your syllabus. It could be a page in your orientation module. And as you can tell from my suggestion for the template that I recommended, you can include that right in the assignment itself when you're going to give them feedback. Because many students, especially those new to Canvas, don't know how to find feedback in Canvas, it's a really great idea to include links to the relevant Canvas guides. And let me show you an example of that. Sorry, my web browser is slow. So you can see I've got my detailed directions, and then down at the bottom I have a number of relevant Canvas guides, so that if they're brand new to Canvas and they don't even know how to submit an online assignment, I've given them I haven't written out the directions, but I've given them a resource. And then I've given them resources for how to view comments and how to view annotated feedback, etc. So that I'm really setting them up to get the most out of that assessed. Okay, our last rubric item, and then we'll dive into all your questions. C8 is about self-assessment. And the aligned definition, several opportunities for student self-assessment with feedback are present. So in order to help students critically analyze their progress, we need to provide them with realistic indicators of their performance. So they can use these assessments to modify their learning, increase their studying, or even drop the course if that's appropriate. I have had instructors tell me when we talk about this rubric item, well, every assessment is a self-assessment. In a sense, that's true. And the higher achieving students will probably recognize that naturally. This element of the rubric is aimed at supporting students on the other end of the spectrum, those who haven't necessarily been taught or figured out that grades don't just happen to them. They actually are able to make changes that impact their grades. So what this rubric item is asking for are specific low stakes opportunities where students are asked to reflect on their performance and make plans for improvement. So this might look like a pre-test followed by a reflection on how they did, or asking them to draft a short plan for how they're going to revise an essay or a research paper. Or maybe you give them a short narrative question on a quiz or a midterm that asks them to describe 1 or 2 things they could do to improve their grade or their performance in the class. I have a resource, and I'm going to be sharing all the links to these at the end, but I just like to show them to you as I'm talking. I've got a resource with a bunch of different self-assessment ideas. And I just want to mention there are 2 levels of self-assessment. There's the content-based assessment, which is about your actual subject matter. And then there's the cognitive level of self-assessment. Do I know how to learn? And so when you come to this page, if you do, you'll see there are different types of questions that are getting at both levels, the content and the cognitive level. A lot of our students come to us never having been really given good study skills, so they don't necessarily know they should be spending a particular amount of time, or they don't know that they should be modeling exemplary assignments or whatever, or turning things in on time. So see, there's a variety of question types, and I just wanted to explain why some of them are content-based and some of them aren't. It is important that these self-assessment opportunities have some mechanism for feedback from you. You're the subject matter expert. Students may not recognize that they're off track and not understanding course concepts, or if they do recognize it, they won't necessarily know the best way to rectify it. You're going to be the one that can help them with that. So how you provide that feedback is going to depend on the assessment tool you're using. So we talked earlier about customizing the answer feedback on quiz questions, which is a way to turn a practice quiz into an effective self-assessment. You might also send out an announcement explaining a common misconception that you noted in students' responses to a question and offering a corrective explanation. Or you might use the Message Students Who feature in SpeedGrader or the Canvas inbox to send targeted messages that relate to a specific issue you noted in a student's response, along with a suggested resource to help correct the issue. Harkening back to the idea of frequency, it's really useful to front load self-assessment activities earlier in the course. This gives students who are off track the chance to shift direction and impact their grade positively. So you might have a self-assessment in week 2 or 3, and then another in week 5 or 6, and week 8 or 9, and week 12 or 13. In a 16-week course, it's probably not going to be very useful to have a self-assessment in week 15 or 16, especially if that's the only self-assessment opportunity I'm given. There's very little chance I'm going to be able to do anything at that point that would significantly impact my grade. So you just want to be thinking about how is self-assessment going to be useful to the student and when is going to be appropriate times to offer it to them. Before we get to the Q&A, there's a couple of things I want to share with you. Next week, the final webinar in our Course Design Rubric series. It's on Section D, and Cheryl Chapman will be leading it. Create accessible course content. I'm going to put the registration link in the chat so that you've got it if you haven't signed up for it yet. And there's a couple of resources I want to share with you. Oh, somebody is not muted, but that's okay. The CVC-OEI website has a lot of general resources for online teaching. And so I'm going to put that in the chat. And I didn't put it, sorry, I can't type and talk at the same time. And I didn't have that one to copy and paste. So if you, oh, and I didn't put the title. Anyhow, it's the CVC-EDU. When you go there, let me show you, because this is where you're going to find the recordings of the various webinars. When you go to the website, you will find View Events Calendar. And you may not intuitively think, oh, that's where I'm going to find the webinar archives. But in fact, that is where you're going to find the webinar archives. When you click into the events calendar, you're going to see it has a link to our YouTube channel. And we have a webinars playlist. And that's where we're putting all of the archived webinars. So you can go find today's probably in a couple of days. It takes us a little while to get things done. And the ones from last week or previous. And a lot of other great resources are there as well.
Helen, are we linking the slide decks to those as well?
No, I'm not, because my slide deck really is not a standalone thing. So that's why I'm making sure we're giving all these links here, but the slide deck isn't going to be useful to people as a standalone. The other thing I want to share with you is the Course Design Resources shell, which is that place that I was clicking into to show you a lot of the examples, and I just wanted to share it with you. It follows the rubric structure, so when you go into the modules area, you're going to see it's got the same A1, A2, etc. So if you go down to section C, it's got a little bit of tips and information and examples for those. And you'll see with self-assessment, I have a number of different examples that some instructors have found useful. And the other thing, and I think I shared it earlier, but I just want to make sure I do, Canvas guides are fabulous. I really find them helpful. They have a very big index of guides though, and it can sometimes be a little cumbersome to find the one that you want. So what I often recommend people do is actually just Google Canvas LMS and whatever your topic is. So maybe it's Canvas LMS custom quiz feedback. And generally speaking, the first or second search result you get is going to be that guide that you want. So if you like that idea, I just find it an easier way to get to the guides that I want is to just go straight to Google and do a search for it. One last thing I want to share with you before we get to the questions is we have a, hold on, I got to get back to everyone. We have on our @ONE website, sorry, I can't talk and do this all at once. I should know better than to try. An archive of Section C related resources. And so it's going to have blog posts and bite-sized Canvas and contributions from faculty around the state. So if you have a contribution, let us know. But it just may be another resource for you as you get familiar with Section C of the rubric. So just wanted to share all of those various resources with you. As someone mentioned earlier, it is possible. What I recommend, what I always do when I'm in a webinar is if they're putting links in the chat, I click the link so it opens up on my browser. And then after the webinar is done, I can just go and explore and I don't have to worry about missing the link. The other option is for you to copy the chat and save it to your desktop or wherever you save your downloaded files, and then go back into the chat and find the links. The one drawback, I think, is when you save the chat file like that, the links aren't live. So you'd have to copy and paste everything into your browser. That's why I find it easier to just click the live link in chat, know that I have a bunch of tabs open and I'm going to go explore them after the call. Okay, I think that's all the resources I wanted to share. What questions do you have about Section C or assessment? Cheryl or Sean, anything from chat that I should be aware of? Although you guys probably
I think we're pretty good. Edward has some questions about canned feedback.
Okay.
You know, the feedback in the questions, where it goes.
I'm not sure I understand. Do you mean how you put feedback in a quiz?
Yeah, I was just typing that. So basically there's a spot in each question, Edward, that you can put whatever feedback you need to, like, wow, that's the right answer. And, you know, you must have found it here in blah, blah. Or more often it's when the, you know, it's the incorrect answer. And if you want to give them the answer or lead them back to part of your course or materials. So, and there's a guide I'm going to post right now that will tell you everything. Yeah,
the Canvas guide's going to be most helpful. And once you've done it a time or two, it's easy to know how to get there, but it's right there in Canvas. Okay, and if you want to ask your question aloud and let us hear your lovely voice, feel free to use the raise hand feature so that I know you've got a question, and then I can go ahead and unmute you. Better to provide feedback on a specific question or for the quiz? Christy, I would say better for the specific question because, I mean, it depends on what the assessment is, but if it is a quiz, I would say better for the individual questions because each question presumably has a different right answer and a different set of wrong choices. And so the feedback, just giving generic feedback isn't going to be as useful as giving that targeted feedback. Hopefully that answers your question.
Edward, maybe you should ask your question aloud. Maybe I'm not understanding it, because you said it might be overwhelming to respond to, say, 20 questions that different students missed.
Okay, so what, if I'm understanding, when you're in the quiz, and we're not, you know, we don't have time for me to go in and show you this right now, which is why the guide that Cheryl shared is going to be very helpful. But when you go into the quiz, and let's say you have 1 right answer and 3 wrong answers, each of those 4 answers, Canvas allows you to give specific feedback. So if a student selected answer A, they get this feedback. If they selected answer B, they get this feedback. So you're not having to give feedback to 20 different students who all got the same wrong answer. Anybody who gets that wrong answer is going to get that pre-loaded feedback for that quiz question. Hopefully I said that in a way that made sense. It does take time to set it up if you haven't done this previously. So if you have a 20-question quiz, it's not going to be a 5-minute thing. It's going to take a little while. What I have done is pick a course and just chip each semester, just pick 1 course and start working on those quizzes. Don't try to do all of your courses, all the quizzes at once. You're going to get, as you said, totally overwhelmed. So just have it as a goal and keep chipping away at it little by little, so that when it's done, it's done. You don't have to worry about it anymore. Christine is saying she's seen instructors use a lot of generic rubrics. Generic rubrics are really not useful to you because they don't help you grade, and they're certainly not useful to the student because it doesn't give them clear expectations. So I am not a fan of generic rubrics, and I love very specific, well thought out rubrics. Again, this is something that requires a bit of upfront time, because a well thought out rubric doesn't happen in a moment. You have to think about it. But there are lots of places. In fact, if you Google essay on Virginia Woolf rubric, you may get some ideas from what other people have already shared. So there's lots of ways to figure out how to write the rubric criteria and the narratives and things. You don't have to necessarily come up with it from scratch on your own, but it does take some time to create those really effective rubrics. And Christy, you say, I wasn't sure how students view them. When you say them, do you mean quiz answers or do you mean the rubric? I'm not sure what it is you're not sure how students view. So you could either put in chat or let me know. And Patrick, Cheryl's answer about Mastery Path, it's not something that I am well versed on, and it's kind of off. I mean, I guess Mastery Paths will include assessments, but it's a really big topic and not something that we can give you just a quick little 30-second answer to. So I think the guide that Cheryl shared is going to be your best starting point. And also, again, I would recommend Googling Canvas Mastery Paths, because there is probably a Canvas community that's talking about it, and that'll give you a lot of great information as well. So Christy, again, so you're saying you're not sure how students view the feedback. When you set up the quiz, there are options for how students are able to view the feedback. And so it will depend on how you set that up as to whether they get the feedback immediately, whether if you're giving them multiple attempts, you may choose to give the feedback after their final attempt if all you're doing is telling them right and wrong. But if you're giving them corrective feedback and sending them to a resource to go relearn it, you may want to give them that feedback right away. But you're going to need to set it up in the quiz settings when students are going to be able to view it. And again, you may want to find the Canvas guide on that, because your students may not know that, or include it in your directions so that they know, hey, I'm going to be giving you great feedback on the quiz answers. Be sure to look for it, just so they're prepared. Anything I missed in chat, Sean or Cheryl?
Let's see, one just came up.
Okay, can you make a rubric on a specific scientific concept like glycolysis? You know, I can't even say it, glycolysis, and use it for all the questions related to that? Well, possibly. I don't know what you're doing with the concept, but if you, for example, are wanting them to explain the process of glycolysis and then share 2 examples of, and I don't even know what uses, if it's mammals or plants or whatever, but you know, I'll make it up. So share 2 plants that use glycolysis or 2 human systems that use, those could be separate rubric criteria because it's 2 different grading things. 1, they explained it, 2, they shared examples. So I don't know if that's what you're having them do with it, but it is entirely possible to have very targeted rubrics, or you might have a more, I don't want to say generic because I don't mean generic, but let's say you have students do multiple essays. You might have a single essay rubric that is attached to all of the different essays students are asked to write because you're using the same grading criteria for all of those essays. Hopefully that distinction makes sense. What resources can students use in an assessment? Well, it may be go back and read chapter 3, or it may be if you read chapter 3 and you're still a little fuzzy on X, here's another resource you might want to watch. Here's a Khan Academy video, here's an article, or you know, I don't know what the resources will be. If you're having them do a presentation, for example, you might give them a resource on how to use PowerPoint. You don't want to spend time teaching them that, but they may not have ever used PowerPoint before. So why not give them a link to a resource on it? So if they need to teach themselves, they don't have to spend the time finding out where you've given it to them right in the instruction directions. Does that make sense, Chris? Hopefully it does. So I can't say for sure what resources, it'll depend on your assessment, but those are the kinds of things that you would want to be thinking about to include for students.
And then one might have gotten lost up in the top.
Okay.
How can I connect with discipline experts for rubric C5, for example, studio art or fine sample rubric?
Well, I don't have a specific answer, Heike, but I would go to people in your department and talk with them. You might, again, Google is my best friend. When I don't know anything, I immediately Google it. So you might Google rubrics for studio art or something like that and see what comes up. It may lead, you may get something right away, or it may lead you to a community that's talking about studio art rubrics and you can join them. Or so there's no set way for how you would do it. You might Google community of practice studio art and again see if there's communities of practice out there that you could go and join and find out, pick their brains. So there's just all kinds of ways. Cheryl or Sean, do you have another idea for how they might find subject matter experts?
Bob Nash created those. What are they called?
Communities of practice.
Yeah.
Yeah, the OEI is sponsoring some communities of practice. I don't know that there's one specifically on studio art or even art, but if you want to write Bob Nash, let me put his email in the chat. Bob Nash, oops, he is spearheading the communities of practice that the OEI is sponsoring for our system. And you might, whoops, I put Nash and I meant Bob Nash. You might let him know you're interested to see if they can get together an art community of practice. Oh, and it looks like Laura just put in some information. Laura, are you sharing your email with me for a particular reason? I'm not clear, sorry.
I think she's giving an instructional designer shout out for Steve at Palomar.
Okay. You're very welcome, Nancy. All right, last call for questions. You can either raise your hand if you want to be unmuted, or you can put something in the chat. Oh, okay, Laura, you're saying, okay, so Steve teaches art and he has a good rubric. Excellent. So that was a resource for Heike. So Heike, you may want to grab Steve's information and let him know that Laura Ridley sent you. It's been a pleasure sharing with you today. Thank you so much for being here. Hopefully you'll go to our last one next week on creating accessible content with Cheryl, and we will see you there. And you're getting some more resources about other good rubrics. Again, just if you Google, you're going to find a wealth of information. You're very welcome to those of you that are quickly saying thank you, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.